Good evening, everyone. Had to turn my mic on. I hope everybody's doing well. Happy Tuesday night. A lot to get into. And if you could, let me know if you can hear me all right. Let me know if you can see everything all right, if you can hear me all right, all that stuff. Probably help if I put my headphones on. All right, first chat out of the gate. I'm done with Flipper Carlson. Well, it's a good thing, Rob, that you brought that up because that is what we're going to discuss tonight. Actually, a lot has happened since the first Sunday live stream. And let me know if Rob, if you can hear me okay. But the first live stream was going over what Nick Fuentes was talking about related to Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens having a discussion on Tucker Carlson's show about Nick Fuentes. And it was somewhat interesting because of the timing of it. And again, a lot has happened since that incident. Well, even rewinding farther than that, you had Nick Fuentes, who was on Candace Owens' show. She ambushed him during that interview. Then she's talking trash about Nick with Tucker Carlson on Tucker Carlson's show. And then, of course, all the things that I mentioned before. You know, these are people who flip-flop constantly. They go with the wind, whatever's politically expedient for them, whatever is expedient for their careers. Same thing with Charlie Kirk, same thing with Glenn Beck. But what Nick was going over in this video on Rumble was he was rewinding all the way back to the connections between Tucker Carlson and his father, all the way back to Patrick Buchanan and other neocons that really kind of got their start back in the 50s in the Cold War after World War II. And so it's, super interesting conversation that he gets into, and it's really interesting the information that he gets into on how they're all interconnected. Back at Yale, they were at the Skull and Bones. They were recruited by the CIA through a particular professor at Yale. So I don't want to get too far into it because there's a lot to cover. There's a second half that we have to go through. If you haven't seen the first half, obviously wait, watch this, and then you can go back to it and put it all together. Since then, Candace Owens, Elon Musk, Milo Yiannopoulos, and Ryan Dawson have attacked Nick. I think it was yesterday or the day before. So there is a full-on attack from the Conservative Inc. people who are all interconnected going after Nick Fuentes. And all this does is it solidifies, at least my opinion, that Nick is over the target. If you were to compare Nick with anybody else, does he have his quirkiness? Does he say certain things that are kind of, maybe off the cuff or, a little, I don't know, rough maybe? Yeah, but at the same time, if you were going to take somebody like Nick Fuentes and compare him or stand him up against all the other conservative talking heads, the guy that I trust at my age, knowing what I know and my history, knowing Pat Buchanan, not personally, but knowing about Pat Buchanan and the other neocons that were that my father and I basically it was really my father's generation when you're talking about the 50s and the 60s with William F. Buckley Jr. and all of these guys and how it all ties into what's going on now. So I'm going to go ahead and start the video from the point we left off from Sunday and go from there. And I am going to interrupt. I had somebody complaining I was interrupting too much last time, but I don't think I was at all. I was trying to do my best not to interrupt, but there are some interruptions that have to be made. And if anybody has any questions, put them in the chat. And before I get even farther, please do me a favor. please follow us if you haven't, either where, depending on where you're from. We have a bunch of people. We have over 40, close to 40 people on X, and we have a few people on Rumble. So if you're on Rumble, make sure that you're subscribed. Also, YouTube, subscribe as well. And then check out if you are on X, or if you're not on X, subscribe on X and find me. We do X Spaces every morning at 9 a.m., which is a lot of great information that you'll get there. And then also Substack. Go to my DennisHendrickson.com website. I'm going to go ahead and put that on the site here. So you could, it's DennisHendrickson.com. You can join there for free, or if you have your phone handy, you can scan that QR code. This is really the home base for everything. So I do write articles, not every week, but I'm trying to do it every week. And then all of the other information, links, posts, things like that is basically going to be culminated into that one website there at DennisHendrickson.com. And it is a Substack site with its own URL of DennisHendrickson.com. So check us out there. And then also too, we have a great new partnership with Goldco. We just started that. And so I talk about Bitcoin and I talk about gold, especially with what's going on in the government right now, with how crazy things are and Wall Street out of control. You can't obviously trust the government. So having your retirement assets in physical gold, also having your assets in Bitcoin, but self-custody, in my opinion, it's what I do. And to me, I feel a lot better that I don't have my money under the control of government. They can't take it away from you, especially if you have physical gold and you have Bitcoin in cold storage. So let's go ahead and get started. Enough of the plugging, and let's go ahead here.
The term neoconservative had originally appeared in the early 1970s, applied by critics to a small group of social scientists and other intellectuals who had rejected the radicalism of the 1960s and gravitated towards more moderate positions. In 1965, Irving Kristol co-founded The Public Interest, a semi-academic quarterly journal focused on matters of social policy. Many of these individuals were Jews originally from New York City, often with deep personal roots in the non-Stalinist left, including Trotskyites. Also around that time, Commentary Magazine, edited by Norman Podhoretz and based in the same city, New York, moved in a similar direction, replacing its enthusiasm for the radical new left with sharp criticism, becoming the leading American publication associated with the early neoconservative movement. In those pre-internet days, professionally produced print publications with a national circulation were an extremely scarce intellectual resource, and as such, could serve as the focal point for a nascent ideological movement. Okay? This is an important point to understand. In the 2020s, how do people get their ideas and information? We get it from social media. 15, 20, 30 years ago, how did people get their information? Cable news, television. But in those days, in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, the policymakers, the politicians, the intellectuals, they were influenced by intellectual magazines. Now, even if the magazines did not have a huge readership, even if they were not read by millions of people or even hundreds of thousands of people, even if they were read by a small audience, it matters who that audience was. And in those days, that audience was the opinion makers, the taste makers, the policy makers, the intelligentsia. So what Unz is talking about, and this is critical to understand the influence of the neocons, is that the Congress for Cultural Freedom with the CIA is funding all these small magazines. And you might not understand the significance of it, but these small magazines, these radio stations, these international television programs, like we talked about last week, as Dick Carlson himself said, this is the lifeblood. This is the bread and butter of political movements, domestically and internationally. This is the intellectual juice behind them. This influences them. So the article says, in the pre-internet days, it is these professional publications, which were scarce, the national circulation professional publications, that would be the focal point for an ideological movement. And that's how the neoconservatives got started. It says, but Commentary, one such magazine, again edited by Norman Podhoretz, was also the flagship publication of the American Jewish Committee. And Podhoretz himself deeply identified with Jewish issues. Those factors impacted his editorial line, which naturally included a major focus upon Israel and the Middle East along the plight of Soviet Jewry. Partly for such reasons, a hawkish foreign policy, including heavy emphasis on the Cold War, became important neocon concerns. So think about how this develops. We got to back up and talk about the history again. So in the 1950s, we are in a Cold War with the Soviet Union. And very quickly it becomes clear that Jews are going to be the intermediary between the Soviet Union and the United States. It is going to be Jews, Jewish spies, Jewish double agents. They act as the mediators. They're conducting arbitrage between the Soviets and the Americans. I'll give you a few examples. In 1949, the Soviet Union detonates an atomic bomb. How did the Soviet Union get the bomb when the Americans developed it in secrecy? How did the Soviets get it before the British, before the French? They got it through Jewish spies, like Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, who were Jewish communists in America that passed the secrets to Soviet spies. In 1956, Nikita Khrushchev, the general secretary who succeeded Joseph Stalin after his death in 1953, Khrushchev gave a famous speech in 1956, de-Stalinizing the Communist Party. For the first time ever, he destroyed the cult of personality around Stalin by criticizing the excesses of the purges and other policies like the 5-year plans that Stalin inflicted on Russia. It was so secretive, it was called the secret speech, and it was only delivered to the Communist Party. But the United States got their hands on it. How? Because of Jewish refugees that left the Soviet Union, gave it to Shin Bet, the Israeli intelligence agency, who gave it to the CIA. So how did the Soviets get the bomb? Jewish spies. How did the Americans get the secret speech? Jewish spies. If the United States is fighting a spy war, an intelligence war with the Soviet Union, Jews are going to be a very big part of that. And why is that? Because Jews live in Russia, Jews live in the United States. They live in Germany, they live in France, they live in the United Kingdom, they live in Italy. And they don't have allegiance to their home countries. They might have allegiance to Israel. They might have ideological affinity with communism. They might have ideological affinity with capitalism. But because they're not, strictly speaking, American or Russian by ethnicity, or Italian or French, because they are stateless, they become free agents. And they could pick sides depending on their ideology, depending on their ideals. So an American Jew could be an ideological communist in their heart and betray America. A Russian Jew could be born in Russia but betray the Soviet Union because they're American in their heart. They're capitalist in their heart because they flee to Israel and they want to support Israel. Okay? So during the 1950s, 1960s, and 1970s, you have Americans that are engaged in a Cold War with the Soviet Union. But American Jewry, Russian Jewry, and Israel are somewhere in the middle. Now, the Americans are fighting with the Russians in Cuba, in Korea, in Vietnam. We're in the middle of an arms race, a space race. And for those that don't know, the space race is really an arms race. Because when we're building rockets that are ostensibly supposed to do satellites and go to the moon, they also have a dual use, which is as intercontinental ballistic missiles. So in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, Americans are going crazy. The American leadership is going crazy because we're saying, how do we defeat this enemy? They seem to be everywhere. These countries are falling like dominoes. And the Soviets have a bigger conventional force in Europe. They have a bigger nuclear arsenal. They might have the advantage.
Now, this is important because I don't think a lot of people truly understand, again, what this was all about. And kind of rewinding to the first half on Sunday, what we were going over, there were Jews that were coming out of the Soviet Union. And the only way we can get intelligence from them, from our intelligence agencies and CIA, was interviewing those Jews that were coming out and going to Israel and settling in Israel through the intelligence agencies, through them. So it was really important to the CIA and intelligence for the United States to fight against communism. That's how that it was a huge deal, obviously, in the 50s and the 60s. I mean, we were fighting wars over it in Korea and Vietnam. And so it's odd to think that now it almost seems in a way that communism has kind of taken over and re-infiltrated the United States, because it seemingly is like no one's really doing anything to try and stop communism. But back then, and what we're talking about now, their primary goal was to stop communism.
This is what's happening in America. And so the Americans are funding these magazines to stall and to forestall communist influence in Europe and the United States. But there's something happening at the same time, which is that Israel is fighting a war for independence. Israel declares its independence in 1948. They fight a war with Egypt and Syria. Jewish organized crime in America runs guns illegally to Israel, which helps Israel decisively defeat a coalition of Egypt and Syria in the war. And an unsteady peace breaks out. In 1955, Israel does a major raid on Gaza and kills 35 Egyptians. Egypt is not receiving arms from the United States and Europe, but Israel is. So what does Egypt do? President Nasser turns to the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union begins supplying weapons to Israel's enemies, Egypt and Syria. In 1956, Israel goes to war with Egypt. Throughout the 50s and 60s, Israel's at war with its neighbors, with the Palestinians, with terrorist groups. Israel is fighting for its very survival. And as time goes on, Egypt and Syria and all the other Muslim countries are moving closer to the Soviet Union, and Israel is moving closer to the United States. By the mid-1960s, when Lyndon Johnson is installed in the United States, we start pouring weapons into Israel. Whereas up until 1963, we were not giving Israel a lot of weapons, and that was in the pursuit of balance between Israel and the Arabs. All of a sudden, we were giving them tons of guns. And we really made the decision that Israel was going to be our country. They were going to be our bulwark against communism in the Middle East. Something very important happens in 1967. In 1967, Israel sees an opportunity to strike a crushing blow on Egypt and Syria, its prime adversaries, its most powerful adversaries on its southern and northern border. In the Six-Day War, Israel flies into Egypt and destroys its air force. Then Israel flies into Syria and destroys its air force. With total air superiority, Israel invades Gaza, Israel invades the Sinai Peninsula from Egypt, and then Israel in the north takes the Golan Heights and nearly sieges Damascus in the north inside of Syria. And in 6 days, the war is over. Israel is bigger than ever. It now occupies not just the entire Mandate of Palestine, the West Bank and Gaza, but it also occupies the Sinai and the Golan Heights. Israel is massive. Now, in response to this sneak attack, the Soviet Union begins giving more support to Egypt and Syria. The left wing in America, the American political left, has a harsh reaction. They view the Israeli war as aggression, as provocative. They view it as an occupation of these third world countries. And so the American political left and the Soviet Union turn against Israel. In 1973, Egypt and Syria have their revenge. They launch a surprise attack on Israel. Egypt invades the Sinai Peninsula from the Suez Canal. Syria invades the Golan simultaneously. Israel is caught totally off guard. They're almost overrun and defeated. They come very close to the brink of annihilation. The United States initially is reluctant to bail them out. Israel threatens to use nuclear weapons. The prime minister of Israel at the time, Golda Meir, calls up Richard Nixon and Henry Kissinger and says, if you don't give us support, if you don't bail us out, we will have to take extraordinary measures, implying nuclear weapons. And they begin taking their nuclear warheads and putting them in public view of satellite imagery to send the message to Nixon and Kissinger. Nixon and Kissinger bail out Israel with a massive airlift of weapons. And there's a very contentious period of negotiations between the Americans and the Soviets, the Israelis and the Egyptians, but eventually the war is settled. In 1975, the Soviet Union goes to the United Nations and they pass a resolution saying that Zionism is racism. The Soviet Union is now fully against Israel. And they're against Israel because they're backing Syria, they're backing Egypt, which Israel has just invaded, attacked, at war with, violating the terms of the ceasefire. The Soviet Union is backing Israel's enemies and passing resolutions in the UN objecting to Zionism itself. And the Soviet Union's allies in America, the American political left, is also decidedly against Israel. They say that Israel's colonizers, racists, they take the side of the Egyptians and the Syrians. And this is where many of the Jewish left-wingers that were supported by the Congress for Cultural Freedom in the 50s and 60s. Now remember, they themselves were communists. They were from New York. They were liberals. They were leftists. Remember, the purpose of the Congress for Cultural Freedom was to beat back the ideological influence of the Soviet Union by steering the left away from communism and Stalinism and towards a more moderate form of left-wing politics. And many of those intellectuals were part of a Jewish New York intellectual scene in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. All these guys were left-wingers. And the neocons like Irving Kristol and Norm Podhoretz, they were left-wing too. But when they saw the American political left's reaction to 67 and 73, when they saw the Soviet Union's resolution at the UN, when they saw the Soviet Union go firmly behind Egypt and Syria, that is when the Jewish neocons flipped. And this is what they had to say about it. These are the two preeminent neocons, Irving Kristol and Norm Podhoretz. Irving Kristol, in a Wall Street Journal essay titled Notes on Yom Kippur, said that he admitted to a Jewish instinct for impending disaster. He wrote, "I care desperately. I sense deep down that what happens to Israel will be decisive for Jewish history and for the kinds of lives my grandchildren and great-grandchildren will be leading. In such a war, not only is the whole of the Jewish past at stake, but also the whole of the Jewish future." That's Irving Kristol, the godfather of neoconservatism. That's Irving Kristol, the god.
And if you don't know, and I think he gets into this later on, he is the father of Bill Kristol. Bill Kristol is a prominent neocon as well. You probably see him a lot on different networks and things like that. I don't see him as much anymore, but Bill Kristol is a very well-known name in the neocon spaces and talking heads and writers and things like that.
Godfather of neoconservatism, who founded what was at the time the most influential neocon magazine in the 1960s, which is The Public Interest. He said in his notes on the Yom Kippur War that the whole of Jewish history is at stake. He sensed it. Norm Podhoretz, who founded Commentary Magazine, which is arguably the second or first most influential neocon magazine after Public Interest, Norman Podhoretz had this to say about the 1975 resolution by the Soviet Union. He said, quote, "The resolution did not merely condemn the state of Israel for alleged crimes against the Palestinians or for discriminating against its own Arab citizens. What the resolution did was to denounce the state of Israel itself as an illegitimate entity. The very idea of a sovereign Jewish state in the Middle East, let alone the actuality of one, no matter what its boundaries might be, was by definition declared criminal. In the eyes of this resolution, Israel could only cease to be criminal if it ceased to be both Jewish and sovereign, if, in other words, it ceased to exist. Returning to the boundaries of 1967 or even the boundaries of 1948 would make not the slightest difference, for the resolution did not concern boundaries or occupied territories. It concerned the right of a sovereign Jewish state of any size or shape to exist in the Middle East. In a profile of Podhoretz, it said, quote, he felt deeply betrayed by the American left, and not to mention the Europeans, who became critical of the Jewish state after the 1967 war, and even more so after the Yom Kippur War in 1973. Podhoretz later wrote that after the war, he would direct commentary to become more aggressive than it had ever been before in defending Jewish interests, both at home and abroad. So you have these Jewish leftists in New York. They're being funded by the CIA. These Jewish intellectual leftists, they're being funded by the CIA to curb the radical tendencies, the Stalinist, Soviet sympathetic tendencies of the American left wing. And they're working hand in glove with the CIA, who's also against the Soviet Union. But as Israel progresses in its own story, Israel finds itself at odds, in peril, with its Soviet-backed neighbors. And in a series of wars, starting in 67, leading into 73, American Jewish leftists realize the Soviet Union is really the enemy. Because the Soviet Union and the American left, if they had it their way, they would make it so that Israel doesn't exist. The Soviets are backing Israel's enemies, and the American left is backing the Soviets' claim that Israel has no right to exist. And so the two preeminent neocons, they would become the preeminent leaders of the neoconservative movement, Irving Kristol and Norm Podhoretz, they are liberals, they are leftists. They say, we are no longer of the left. We feel betrayed. We are no longer supporting the European left. We feel betrayed by Europe, by the American left wing, to some extent by our fellow liberals, leftists, even communists, because they have no sympathy for Israel as Israel is being destroyed. And this is why they turn to the right. This is from PBS. It says, quote, the neoconservatives were mostly former leftists who deserted George McGovern's Democratic Party in protest against its opposition to the war in Vietnam. While it was true that many neocons were Jewish, so too was the Secretary of State Henry Kissinger. The turning point for them came in 1973 with Israel's near defeat at the hands of the Arabs. It was Kissinger himself who observed in his memoirs that the Yom Kippur War, quote, completed the neocons' conversion to geopolitical realities. Henceforth, they agitated in favor of a U.S. foreign policy that melded fervent anti-communism with uncompromising support for Israel. Now, I want to get into their biographies. That is what made them neoconservatives. What did they do as neoconservatives? This is the New York Times.
And two, I don't think he mentions this, but this is really also where Rhino comes from, Republican in name only. So they switch parties, which is fascinating when you think about it. So they were leftists and then decided that they were going to switch parties because of what was going on with the Soviet Union. So first, it's kind of difficult to sort of wrap your head around. Well, of course, they should have been anti-communist or anti-Soviet Union simply because they were communists. But then they were like, well, take it one step further. They were saying that Zionism was racist. So that made them switch the party from Democrats to Republicans. But of course, you can't take the Democrat out of the Democrat. So then we have that same thing in modern day politics as well.
On Irving Kristol. It says, quote, Mr. Kristol exerted an influence across generations from William F. Buckley to the columnist David Brooks. Through a variety of positions he held over a long career, including executive vice president of Basic Books, the contributor to the Wall Street Journal, and a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. He was commonly known as the godfather of neoconservatism. In probably his most widely quoted comment, Mr. Kristol defined a neoconservative as a liberal who had been mugged by reality. Mr. Kristol translated his concerns into a magazine. In 1965, with a $10,000 contribution from a wealthy acquaintance, he founded the Public Interest magazine. Its founding is considered the beginning of neoconservatism. For more than 6 decades, beginning in 1942, when he and other recent graduates of City College founded Enquiry, a journal of independent radical thought, his life revolved around magazines. Besides the public interest, Mr. Crystal published, edited, and wrote for journals of opinion like Commentary, Encounter, The New Leader, The Reporter, and The National Interest. All were little magazines with limited circulation, but Mr. Crystal valued the quality of his readership more than the quantity. He said, with a circulation of a few hundred, you could change the world. So he wrote for Commentary, founded the public interest, and also edited Encounter. Norman Podhoretz, his close friend, served as Commentary's editor-in-chief from 1960 until his retirement in 1995. He is still its editor-at-large. From 1981 to 1987, Podhoretz was an advisor to the U.S. Information Agency. From 1995 to 2003, he was a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute. American-Israeli journalist Benjamin Ballant, and former editor at Commentary, described the magazine as the contentious magazine that transformed the Jewish left into the neoconservative right. Historian and literary critic Richard Pels said no other journal of the past half century has been so consistently influential or so central to the major debates that have transformed the political and intellectual life of the United States.
Sorry, but I have to stop this again because it's, I start thinking, if anybody out there wanted to start a think tank, or if you wanted to start a magazine, obviously it wouldn't be a magazine, but a website or something like that. These guys end up getting funding from, basically dark money is the way I consider it. I have a CIA. So of course, these conservatives are so brilliant and all the things that they write are so wonderful. Well, these guys got help starting the stuff that they did with the magazines. It's amazing to me how many people, and the same thing now, by the way. So when you get into Tucker Carlson, you get into Canada, all of these other Glenn Beck, all these, they're all getting funded somehow. And so we can't do it because of the funding that they get.
This is Irving Kristol and Norman Podhoretz. Now, again, according to Ron Unz, according to Irving Kristol himself, according to the New York Times, they were founding, which are changing the world. It's Irving Kristol at Encounter. It is Norman Podhoretz at Commentary. These are two magazines that they say are changing the world. What is the basis of their influence? What is the conversion? How are they changing the world? What is the basis of the neoconservative movement? Both Irving Kristol and Norm Podhoretz, the godfather and the patriarch of the neocon movement at these magazines, they are both Jews from New York City. They're both left-wing Jews. They're both deeply involved with the CIA. And both of them, after Israel was under attack, turned against the American left, against the radicals, turned against the Soviet Union, and gradually, from 1965 until 1975, transitioned from being Jewish leftists to neoconservatives. Now, Irving Kristol's comment is instructive. Irving Kristol's most famous adage is that the neocons, the essence of what it is to be a neocon, is that they were liberals who got mugged by reality. But let's deconstruct that. Who were the liberals that got mugged by reality?
Same thing with October 7th.
Irving Kristol and Norman Podhoretz. The liberals that got mugged by reality and became the neocons were Jewish leftists. They weren't liberals. They were Jewish leftists that got mugged by reality. In particular, they were Jewish leftists who were backed by the CIA that got mugged by reality. And how did they get mugged by reality? What is he referring to? How did the Jewish left turn into the neoconservative right? If the neocons or libs that got mugged by reality, what mugged them? What does that mean exactly? When Henry Kissinger said they were converted to geopolitical reality, what does he mean? Well, Irving Kristol and Norman Podhoretz say in their own words, they realized that the left had gone too radical when it turned against Israel.
Boom.
When the Soviet Union, under Leonid Brezhnev, started promulgating an anti-Israel doctrine on the basis that Israel was a colonial capitalist power.
It wasn't even about communism.
When the Soviet Union backed Egypt and Syria to the hilt, so much so they almost defeated Israel. And when the non-Jewish American left turned against Israel and made those same arguments that Israel is racist, Israel is a settler colonial state, Israel is an outpost of capitalism and colonialism, that is how they got mugged by reality. The Jewish left got mugged by the non-Jewish Soviet Union and the non-Jewish American and European left that turned against Israel. Irving Kristol and Norm Podhoretz said, if Israel goes down, the whole Jewish future is in jeopardy. And who is pushing Israel to the brink of destruction? The left, the Soviet Union and the American left. And both Irving Kristol and Norm Podhoretz said, after Yom Kippur, they became increasingly pro-Jewish and they married their intense support for Israel to the anti-communism, anti-Soviet Union, Cold War hawk ideological position. Now, there's an interesting fact here. Irving Kristol founded or worked with Encounter magazine in the United Kingdom. Encounter magazine was funded by the Congress for Cultural Freedom. Irving Kristol was present at the founding of the Congress for Cultural Freedom in the 1950s. So that CIA effort to back left-wing anti-Stalinist intellectuals, to curb left-wing radicalism, to curb the Soviet intellectual penetration of America, Irving Kristol was there at its founding in Berlin in the 1950s, and his magazine Encounter got money from the Congress for Cultural Freedom through the CIA. That's the godfather of neoconservatism.
Now, do you see how far back this goes? You know, I don't think a lot of people understand this. I don't think a lot of people know, you know, when we talk about the deep state, when we talk about these things, and we get into these types of conversations, a lot of it is unfortunately surface. But you really have to understand how deep this goes. It's generational, and Nick does talk about this. And once again, I've said before, you cannot judge someone based on someone else's opinion. And that's unfortunately what's happened to Nick, is that people formulate an opinion based on somebody else's judgment of them. And that is the dumbest thing that anyone can possibly do, and they do it all the time. But these are things now, because censorship is being lifted, to where you get to hear these things, and it all ties in. And a lot of us that are old enough to know the Pat Buchanans, the Kristols, the William F. Buckley Jr.'s, going all the way back to, you know, the 50s and the 60s, you know, understand where this is all coming from, because it's a lot deeper than what you read on Truth Social and on Twitter and all these other places.
At public interest, who, according to the New York Times obituary, created the neocon movement when he founded that magazine. And Norman Podhoretz, who founded Commentary, he's the patriarch of the neocon movement. Norman Podhoretz hired Irving Kristol as a writer at Commentary, and Commentary is a project of the American Jewish Committee, which is the representative, that is the head of all the American Jewish groups. It goes back to 1904 and is involved deeply with the early Zionist movement, the State of Israel, and American Jewry. Are you starting to see? So the CIA from its very beginning is working with these Jewish refugees from Nazism, from the Soviets. The most ferocious Cold Warriors see the Jews and then later Israel as an asset against the Soviet Union. They start backing Jewish left-wing intellectuals, paying them to start up these magazines to curb their Stalinist pro-Soviet tendencies. But as the Cold War goes on, Israel becomes entrenched as an American ally. Israel's enemies become entrenched as Soviet allies. And as Israel comes into its own as it develops a nuclear weapon, as it becomes armed by the United States and becomes something like a regional power, it comes into confrontation with Syria and Egypt, who are pushed into the corner of the Soviet Union, which supplies them with more and more weapons. And that makes the Soviet Union more and more anti-Israel. And finally, in 73, when this leads to a catastrophe, which is the Soviet Union backing an Arab invasion of Israel that almost destroys Israel, the Jewish left, backed by the CIA, gets mugged by reality. And they say now it's personal. Before, we were moderate leftists, backed by the CIA, generally pro-Jewish, but somewhat ambivalent about Zionism. They said they had this awakening. If Israel goes down, we all go down. And if Israel goes down, it'll be because of the communists, the American left, and their allies, the Arabs. And we have to redouble our efforts to defeat all of them. The American left, the Muslims, the Arabs, and the communists. And it is Irving Kristol and Norm Podhoretz, the leaders of neoconservatism, through their influential magazines paid by the CIA, that influenced the Jewish intelligentsia to abandon nothing about their liberal ideology other than their pacifism. The only conversion to speak of, they're still liberal. They're still center-left liberals, pro-immigration, pro-free markets, all this kind of stuff. The only thing they changed their mind on is we got to destroy the Soviet Union because it's going to destroy Israel first if we don't. Now,
does that sound familiar? So it's the same thing again, modern day. Iran, Iraq, Syria, et cetera, et cetera. We've got to destroy them before they destroy us.
Now, returning back to the original point here, William F. Buckley and Tucker Carlson say, you can attack the neocons all day, but if you, like Pat Buchanan, say that there's an amen corner in the U.S. that's all Jewish, the Jews want the Gentiles to die in their wars, if you say it has anything to do with Judaism, you're a real anti-Semite and that's a problem. But the essence of neoconservatism is its Jewishness. And when you read the godfathers of neoconservatism, they're not ambiguous about it at all. Irving Kristol said, notes on the Yom Kippur War. I sense deep down whatever happens to Israel is decisive for Jewish history and for the lives of my grandchildren and great-grandchildren. The whole of the Jewish past and future is at stake. That's the godfather of neoconservatism on why he founded neoconservatism. And the why is that if Israel's destroyed, then my Jewish grandchildren will not live healthy, prosperous lives. And you're telling me neoconservatism has nothing to do with Jewishness? Norm Podhoretz, his magazine was created by the American Jewish Committee. And he said the same thing. After Yom Kippur, he said he would become more aggressive than ever in defending Jewish interests at home and abroad. These are indisputably the godfathers of neoconservatism. They each founded the most important publications that created the neocon movement, Public Interest and Commentary. And they say they went from Jewish left to neocon right because Israel was almost destroyed by the Soviet Union. That's what makes them neocons, and that's why they want America to fight the Soviet Union and the Soviets' client states in the Middle East. Egypt, Syria, and then later Iraq, Iran. Hello? And you're telling me that if we say that the Amen Corner, Rosenthal, Krauthammer, Kissinger, if we point out that they're all Jews, we're anti-Semitic? That's what it is.
And on top of that, they don't care, like what Nick just said. Send the American kids to go fight the wars. They don't care. What they care about is their own. And if you and I die fighting their war, that's just the way it is. And that's what people need to really understand and stand up against. And if you do, you're called anti-Semitic. This is the crux of the problem, going all the way back to the 50s and the 60s. Fast forward all the way into now. And when people started getting, they started noticing, they started figuring things out, they started getting information, that's when everything got shut down. That's when the internet got shut down. People got debanked. People got shut up. They got their accounts taken away from them, not because they were lying, but because they were telling the truth, and they had to shut these people up. This right now is the most important problem in America today. The most important problem.
Now let's take it even a step further. You have not seen anything yet. You have seen nothing yet, because I am about to blow your fucking mind. Okay? So Irving Kristol was there at the foundation of the Congress for Cultural Freedom in the 1950s. That's the CIA's program to fund these intellectual movements. Later, he's the godfather of neoconservatism. He creates a magazine called Encounter, which gets money from the CIA. He claims he'll defend Jewish interests at home and abroad after Yom Kippur for the sake of his Jewish children and grandchildren. His buddy, James Burnham, was at the founding board of National Review when Bill Buckley, who was also CIA, founded that magazine. Irving Kristol also undertook another project. Do you remember I talked about the Intercollegiate Studies Institute or the Intercollegiate Society of Individualists that William Buckley founded in 1953? Well, Irving Kristol did something very similar in 1979. Okay? How was William F. Buckley recruited? He was recruited at Yale by his professor, who was a CIA recruiter at Yale. That was his job. And when William F. Buckley graduated and created National Review, he hired his CIA recruiter professor on the board of National Review, as well as a Congress for Cultural Freedom founding member at his conservative magazine in the 50s. This is how the CIA operates. If you're the CIA, how do you find precocious intelligence assets? How do you find people that have a skill for intelligence? You go to the elite schools. Where do you find the smartest people? Where do you find the smartest, most high status, most elite people in American society? The Ivy League schools. You go to Yale. You go to Dartmouth. You go to Columbia. And you go to these 18-year-olds, 20-year-olds who are conservative leaning. And you get their professors who teach them in their classes to pay attention and read their papers. Oh, William F. Buckley seems conservative. He would be a good fit for the CIA. He will help us win this intellectual Cold War. So the CIA gets faculty at the universities, at the Ivy Leagues, who teach the best and brightest, to monitor them, to groom them from a very early age, to watch their careers with great interest. This one's smart, this one's precocious, this one's conservative. He'd make a good CIA officer, and they groom them over time. They encourage those ideological tendencies. They encourage them to write. Bill Buckley wrote at the Yale Daily. Bill Buckley founded the National Review and a campus group with his CIA recruiter professor. This is how this stuff works. Now, Irving Kristol, his contemporary, who again is the godfather of neoconservatism, there at the founding of the Congress for Cultural Freedom with James Burnham, who was at the founding of National Review, Bill Buckley's paper. Irving Kristol, who founded Encounter, funded by the CIA. Irving Kristol. Irving Kristol, who said, I'm a neocon now because of the Yom Kippur War and my Jewish great-grandchildren. In 1979, Irving Kristol founds an organization called the Institute for Educational Affairs. This is the story about that group from Wikipedia. They responded to a request by 2 University of Chicago students for startup funding for a conservative newspaper called Counterpoint. Do you know who founded that magazine? John Podhoretz, Norm Podhoretz's father. So Irving Kristol and Norm Podhoretz found the neocon movement in the 1960s. In 1979, Irving Kristol starts up an educational group called the IEA, Institute for Educational Affairs, and Irving Kristol provides the startup money for Norm Podhoretz's kid, John, to found Counterpoint at the University of Chicago in 79.
Generational. And he's going to keep going. It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy.
It gets better. By 1980, this grant program expands and is called the Collegiate Network. In 1990, the Madison Center for Educational Affairs merges with the IEA. They fund 57 conservative student publications. It takes them 10 years. Would you like to know which student newspapers this group founded? This group of Jewish neocons, led by Irving Kristol. Would you like to know which student newspapers they helped found with their seed money, with their funding?
I do. I want to know.
Well, the first was Counterpoint by Norm Potteritz's kid, John, at University of Chicago in 1979. Then, the Princeton Tory at Princeton University, founded by Yoram Hazony in 1984. Yoram Hazony. Then, in 1987, the Stanford Review, founded by Peter Thiel.
We all know that name.
And the coup de grace, the Dartmouth Review, founded by Dinesh D'Souza.
Dinesh D'Souza. We all know that name,
These
too.
are 4 of the publications that Irving Kristol's Institute for...
And by the way, Dinesh D'Souza, he doesn't mention, had a debate against Nick Fuentes on Alex Jones's show, and Nick Fuentes just took him apart. And it wasn't that hard. I mean, it was, obviously Nick's a much better debater, but based on just truth and truthful information, Nick Fuentes just absolutely destroyed Dinesh D'Souza. I mean, he couldn't even compete with him at all. And here's another guy who's in that camp, even though he's not Jewish, but he's in that camp trying to defend the undefendable.
Educational Affairs provided the seed money for. Counterpoint by John Potteritz at U Chicago. Princeton Tory by Yoram Hazony at Princeton in 84. Stanford Review by Peter Thiel in 1987, and Dartmouth Review by Dinesh D'Souza at Dartmouth University.
That's amazing.
Irving Kristol provided the money for all those student newspapers. And as we've established, Irving Kristol is a CIA asset. He is there at the creation for the Congress for Cultural Freedom. He's the godfather of neoconservatism. He founded Policy Review, or the Policy Journal. He's at Commentary with Norm Potteritz. He founds Encounter with money from the CIA. But it gets even better, because in 1995, this network, the Collegiate Network, the Institute for Educational Affairs, the Madison Center, they're overtaken by ISI, the Intercollegiate Studies Institute, that group that William F. Buckley founded in 1953.
It all came back home.
To bring it all the way home.
Just like the Bourne Identity.
Okay? So William F. Buckley is at Yale, like George Bush before him, like James Angleton before him.
This is crazy.
Bill Buckley's recruited by his professor into the CIA.
Absolutely crazy.
They found ISI, Institute, what is it? The Intercollegiate Studies Institute. William F. Buckley founds National Review with Bill Burnham, who was there at the creation of the Congress for Cultural Freedom, an intellectual group paid by the CIA to fund campus groups, newspapers, radio stations. He's there with James Burnham, who is also there with Irving Kristol at its founding in Berlin in 1951. Later in the 1950s, he founds National Review with James Burnham and his professor and 3 other CIA agents. Irving Kristol starts up the CIA-funded magazines. They're Jewish left-wing publications that turn into Jewish neocon publications. They're funded by the American Jewish Committee and the CIA. And then Irving Kristol provides the seed money for Peter Thiel, Yoram Hazony, Dinesh D'Souza, and John Potter at student newspapers. After all that, in 95, it folds into ISI, which Bill Buckley founded in 1953. That's where it all starts. Now, what's interesting about Irving Kristol is that in the 60s, it was discovered that this was going on. left-wing publications found out that the Congress for Cultural Freedom was backed by the CIA. So Irving Kristol quits and joins the American Enterprise Institute. Now, as I said before, this is a story about generations. Generations over time. You could say that was generation number one. Let's talk about generation number two. So if William F. Buckley got to start at Yale in the 1950s, let's now talk about Peter Thiel, Yoram Hazony. Let's talk about Dinesh D'Souza. Let's talk about John Podhoretz. Let's talk about generation number two, which is, of course, funded and spawned from generation number one. In 1995, Irving Kristol's son, Bill Kristol, founds the Weekly Standard. And it becomes the new preeminent neoconservative publication that Tucker Carlson writes for. Irving Kristol's kid, Bill Kristol, starts Weekly Standard. It's founded with the help of the News Corporation, that's Rupert Murdoch's company. And Tucker Carlson in 95 begs Bill Kristol to hire him at the magazine to write for them, where they push the Iraq War, the second Iraq War, in 2003, and become the most influential publication in favor of the war in Iraq. Let's talk a little bit about Yoram Hazony. Yoram Hazony gets money from Irving Kristol in 1984. Yoram Hazony is an Israeli Jew. He's from Israel. He studies in America, and then he goes back home to Israel. He founds the Herzl Institute, the Shalem Center. These are Jewish nationalist think tanks. This is Yoram Hazony. Yoram Hazony wrote an article in the 1990s about a figure named Kahana. Kahana was a Jewish extremist in Israel. I'll read to you some of his views. This is from his Wikipedia. It says, during his lifetime, Meir Kahana publicized his Kahanism ideology throughout the United States. In Israel, he proposed enforcing Jewish law as codified by Maimonides. While serving in the Knesset in the mid-1980s, Kahana proposed numerous laws, none of which passed, to emphasize Judaism in public schools, reduce Israel's bureaucracy, forbid sexual relations between Jews and non-Jews, separate Jewish and Arab neighborhoods, end cultural meetings between Jewish and Arab students. He went so far as to demand that non-Jews in Israel either become slaves or face deportation. This is a Jewish figure in Israel named Meir Kahana. Yoram Hazony had this to say about that figure in 1994. He wrote this. He wrote, "Here was a man who said what he meant and meant what he said. It was the first time we had ever seen that in a political leader. We were 17 years old. American Jews, children of Orthodox rabbis, educated in Zionist schools and yeshivas, students of the best Jewish institutions in the United States. Yet I don't believe any of us had ever heard the things we heard that day. If someone comes to kill you, kill him first. There is no such thing as innocent civilians in a war. Jewish lives come before those of non-Jews. A Jew should never be ashamed of being a Jew." This is your...
That's how they are now. And that's what's going on in Israel now. That's what's going on with Palestine now. They don't care about you. They'll kill you right where you stand, and they don't care. So that's what you have to wrap your head around and understand.
Yoram Hazony on Meir Kahana. Kahana's message wasn't sophisticated, but it was clear. It was passionate. It affected us in a way nothing else ever had. He said that we had nothing to be ashamed of, that Jewish pride and strength were good things, that we could be proud of who we were, that we had a past worth knowing and a future worth building. We never adopted his political views, but he was the only Jewish leader who seemed to understand how much we wanted to be proud Jews. Kahana didn't tell us to be proud of someone else's interpretation of Judaism. He said Judaism was for us. We didn't need to hide it, to apologize for it, to downplay it in public. We didn't need to water it down. The Torah was ours. Our traditions were good. If we learned them and loved them, we would be strong. For the first time, we realized our schools had never taught us what it meant to be proud Jews. We'd been taught to fit in, to get along, to apologize for what we were, and we had done it well. Kahana's books made us want to be better Jews, stronger Jews, Jews who could live by the Torah without fear, Jews who would one day be fathers who would teach strength and dignity to their children, not hatred, but pride. Now, for those that don't know who this figure is, Yoram Hazony, I'll give you some name drops. You might understand who he is after this. So Yoram Hazony, as I said, in 1984, got funding from Irving Kristol to start the Princeton Tory. 10 years later, he writes this article about Meir Kahane, who said that non-Jews should be enslaved by Jews or killed by Jews. And Hazony says, this guy's the real deal. This guy's awesome. Yoram Hazony is the mentor of Bari Weiss. After Bari Weiss graduated from Columbia University in 2005, she went to Israel to study at Yoram Hazony's Shalem Center. Yoram Hazony is the founder of the National Conservatism Conference, which was started up in 2022 with money from Peter Thiel. And it hosted J.D. Vance, Marco Rubio, Peter Thiel himself, and later Tucker Carlson. That Yoram Hazony. So when you see the National Conservatism Conference, which has been going on for the past 3 or 4 years, which aimed to be the nationalist alternative to CPAC, where Vance, Josh Hawley, Ron DeSantis, Marco Rubio, Peter Thiel, and Tucker have sought to promulgate a new doctrine of nationalist conservatism. This is the founder of that group. This is the mentor of Bari Weiss. He is a Jewish extremist who says that this radical rabbi that wants all Jews to die or be slaves to the Jews is a really great guy and made us proud to be Jewish and all the rest. And he got money from Irving Kristol, probably as a grooming mechanism in '84 at the Princeton Tory. But it gets better. In 1987, the other student newspaper that got funding from Irving Kristol was Stanford Review by Peter Thiel. Now, we all know a lot about Peter Thiel. Peter Thiel, 10 years later, goes on to start PayPal. How did he start PayPal? Well, he worked with the Israeli Jewish professor at Stanford University, who is the head of the cryptography department. Because the big question for how to create a peer-to-peer payment system in the age of the internet was solving the privacy question, solving cryptography. So PayPal was created by Peter Thiel and Max Levchin, another Jew, overseen by the Israeli Jewish head at Stanford University of cryptography. And thus PayPal was born. Peter Thiel banks his millions of dollars from PayPal. And just a year later, after they sell it, he founds Palantir with Alex Karp, who is Jewish, and Joe Lonsdale, who is Jewish. And Palantir's exclusive contract for the next 7 years is the CIA. Over a period of 2 or 3 years, they make 300 visits to CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia. After 2007, they branch out. They take on some new customers. They are the NSA, the FBI, the DHS, even the Department of Health and Human Services, the CDC, Center for Disease Control, all of it. Later on in Peter Thiel's life, he begins to fund all of these national conservative candidates. He hires J.D. Vance at his venture capital firm. He provides the seed money for J.D. Vance's independent venture capital firm. He funds J.D. Vance's Senate run to the tune of $15 million. And of course, among other things, Peter Thiel gives money to Yoram Hazony to found the National Conservatism Conference that J.D. Vance, Peter Thiel, and Tucker Carlson speak at. That's Peter Thiel, who got money from the same group as Yoram Hazony. Peter Thiel also did business in PayPal with Mark Andreessen, who then went on to fund Bari Weiss's Austin University and did a podcast with her not too long ago, shortly after Peter Thiel himself. This is the network.
And that's what it is. It's a network. It's a network going back to the 50s that's continued up until now. That's all tied together. So when you ask who are the people involved, in the deep state? Who are the people in the deep state? You're getting the names from him right now.
And then, of course, we have to talk about J.D. Vance himself. If J.D. Vance is this arch political project, then we have to talk about J.D. Vance as maybe the third generation after the Peter Thiels and Yoram Hazonis. We already talked about J.D. Vance's connection to Tucker Carlson. We already talked about J.D. Vance's connection to Peter Thiel, Yoram Hazony. I'll remind you some things about J.D. Vance. In 2016, J.D. Vance did not vote for Donald Trump. A lot of people know that. He was a never-Trumper, an anti-Trumper. But he took it further than that. Vance did not just not vote for Donald Trump. He didn't not vote altogether. He voted for a third-party candidate. Vance voted for Evan McMullin. And for those that don't know, Evan McMullin was a former CIA officer who was handpicked by Bill Kristol, Irving Kristol's son, to run as a spoiler against Donald Trump in 2016.
I feel like DJ Khaled needs to be in here.
Bill Kristol, founder of Weekly Standard, who Tucker Carlson worked for. Bill Kristol, the son of Irving Kristol, who provided the money for Peter Thiel and Yoram Hazony to found their student newspapers. Kristol handpicked the CIA officer, Evan McMullin, to run against Trump, and J.D. Vance voted for that guy, voted for Evan McMullin. And then, when Evan McMullin lost and Donald Trump won the election in 2017, Vance got together with David Frum, a writer at the Weekly Standard, a member of the American Enterprise Institute, to plot out his comeback tour to take over the conservative movement. Vance is a fellow at the American Enterprise Institute and also a graduate of Yale Law School, very much like William Buckley before him, like George Bush before him, and like James Angleton before him. To bring it all home, there's a last part of information or piece of information I'll introduce here. I want to read to you what Yoram Hazony said about racialists. This was in an interview last week that was conveniently released by Ezra Klein at the New York Times last Friday, shortly before my episode, the first installment in the series last Friday. This is what Yoram Hazony had to say about the future of the right wing and racialism. He said, quote, "Let's talk about other people in the Trump administration. Figures like Michael Anton at the State Department, David Goldman, Bridge Colby at the Defense Department. There are many others like Stephen Miller. All these individuals are, to one degree or another, national conservatives. They attend our conferences, contribute, they're part of our movement. Notice who isn't part of it. From the beginning, we distinguished ourselves in two directions, from libertarians, essentially the liberal Republican wing to our left, and from racialists, anti-democratic movements to our right. Both sides have generated friction. The key question is whether there is a clear border between national conservatives and those to the right. I believe that border is clear. From the beginning, we said we do not admit or invite people whose platforms are racialist. There was a major internal conflict involving a publication called VDare, which I would describe as at least racialist, if not outright racist. At a minimum, it is happy to publish racialists, and for us, that was unacceptable. We do not support politics based on blood. Blood and soil is a literal Nazi term. We reject nationalism rooted in blood. The debate with those to our right is real, but national conservatism is not racialist." This is Yoram Hazony, founder of National Conservatism, in a conversation with Ezra Klein, a Jew at the New York Times.
Listen to this.
He says that the NatCons, the National Conservatives, are J.D. Vance, Marco Rubio, Bridge Colby, Michael Anton. These are our guys. And what we are is not racialist. We are not blood and soil. We are not like V. Dare. For those that don't know, Virginia Dare was founded by Peter Brimelow. Pat Buchanan was published there for decades. Virginia Dare is immigration restrictionist. They're barely even critical of Israel. And here is Yoram Hazony, that second generation of neocon leadership, saying racialism is outside of the picture. It is Nazi. Blood and soil is literally a Nazi slogan, and that is not what national conservatism is. But think about what Yoram Hazony and Irving Kristol and all these guys are in favor of. Yoram Hazony himself said that Meir Kahane is inspiring, a hero, made us proud to be Jewish, made us believe in Jewish tradition, that Israel should be Jewish. But Hazony says national conservatism is not based on blood and soil. Israel is, but America can't be.
Hypocritical. That's the other thing. The blood and soil, it's okay for them, but it's not okay for us. That also is huge to keep in the back of your mind.
Israel is based on the blood of the Jewish people and the soil of their promised land. But America is not. America is not about the blood of the Europeans. It's not about the soil of this land that they settled. But Israel is. He says, and in our national conservative movement, we are not racialist. We don't believe in blood and soil. We're pro-Israel. We're pro-Netanyahu. We're in favor of Jewish nationalism and blood and soil Israeli nationalism.
But not here.
But not so much for America. And who do we count among our ranks? J.D. Vance, who spoke at NatCon. Tucker Carlson, who spoke at NatCon. Josh Hawley, who spoke at NatCon. Marco Rubio, who spoke at NatCon. Bridge Colby, endorsed by Tucker, and hangs out at NatCon. And what did Tucker Carlson say? You're a kook and a crank if you say that neoconservatism has anything to do with Jewishness. What did Joe Kent say? I'm an inclusive populist. I don't want to talk about whiteness or Christianity, and I'm pro-Israel. What have these guys been saying from the start? Bill Buckley called Buchanan an anti-Semite because he said that Jews were making us fight their wars. But they are, and they always have been. Going back all the way. When Tucker talks about the neocons that me and Pat Buchanan are allegedly discrediting, who are the neocons? Over generations, I'll tell you who the neocons are. They are Jewish leftists from New York in bed with the CIA doing arbitrage on behalf of Israel that only became right-wing because Israel was threatened by the American left. That's who they are. And if you read what they write themselves, they will tell you it's not liberals that got mugged by reality. It is those Jewish leftist intellectuals from New York that were surprised when the Soviet Union turned on Israel. And they realized after the Soviets passed that resolution in 75 saying that Zionism is racism, they realized the left wing in America, the left wing in Israel would never let Israel be a Jewish state. And therefore would never let Israel exist. And if Israel cannot be a Jewish state, and Israel ceases to exist, then their Jewish children and their Jewish grandchildren will be imperiled because they will be at the mercy of the communists in Russia, the Arabs in the Middle East, and the Europeans in America, or the Europeans in Europe for that matter. And that is why they undertook a multi-generational campaign to subvert the think tanks, the national security apparatus, the Republican Party, to use it and marry anti-Soviet, anti-Muslim extremist, anti-Iran revisionist power, Cold War, war on terror, unipolar war to Israel's national interest, which is all they ever really cared about. And anybody that notices or recognizes or acknowledges that this is the case, that it's Podhoritzes and Kristals and Hazonis and Weisses and Alamarius and Yarvins and Beatties, if anybody recognizes how many Jewish people are supporting it and why, and read between the lines on what they're saying, they will tar that person as an anti-Semite, not because they hate Jews, but because they see what Jews are doing. And Tucker Carlson said, if you get called an anti-Semite, you can pretend to be a victim of the cabal that runs Washington. Well, what else would you call it? When Bill Buckley got recruited out of Yale, and James Angleton went to Yale, and George Bush went to Yale, and they're in bed with Jewish leftists like Irving Kristol and Podhoretz, whose heart is in Israel, launching wars in Iraq and Iran, in Syria and elsewhere on Israel's behalf. What else would you call it? other than that cabal that will seek to destroy you if you just begin to piece this story together a little bit. Now, who's crazy here? I don't think either of us are crazy. Who's hateful? I don't think either of us are hateful, actually. But Bill Buckley and George Bush and Tucker Carlson clearly represent a faction of the CIA and the U.S. security state. They are married to a mercenary intelligence outfit of Jews in Russia, Israel, and America. And this relationship goes all the way back to the 40s. It goes back to the beginning. The American and British intel services, the Jewish refugees, the early Zionist movement, the eventual Israeli intelligence agencies. These two factions have been inextricably connected for as long as they have existed. And the Americans believe that we're getting the good end of the deal because the Jews are helping us fight communism, helping us fight Islamic extremism, helping us fight Iran and the rogue revisionist states today. But all along, the Jews have been very straightforward about their intentions. These Jewish intellectuals in New York, the Jewish refugees recruited by Angleton, people like Yoram Hazony, the modern Nat Con right, they always knew that they were using the American security establishment, purporting to help America in the Cold War, purporting to help us in the war on terror, purporting to help us in Iran, but all the while giving us false intelligence, lying about their motivations, maintaining a carefully calculated facade that they care about American liberalism, when in reality what they care about is Jewish nationalism. And when somebody like myself, or Patrick Buchanan, or Sam Francis, or Joseph Sobran, or Russell Kirk gets up and starts to upset the apple cart by rallying traditional conservatives against both the CIA and the Israeli Mossad, then those factions team up to call us anti-Semites. When a Pat Buchanan gets up and says, it'll be Murphys and McAllisters and Gonzalez's that die in Israel's war, then it's the job of the CIA and the Israeli Mossad to get together and beat him down and call him an anti-Semite. When Nick Fuentes gets up and says, no, it's not just the Zionists. It's not just the neocons or the nation builders. It's their Jewishness. It's their affinity with their own nation and with the state of Israel that makes them do this. It is Tucker and Candace Owens. It is the ADL and the SPLC. It's Ben Shapiro and Mark Levin that are going to call me the anti-Semite, a crazy, a nut job, a hater, because I'm simply pointing out the connections. But based on the weight of the evidence tonight, I think you understand how all of this works. The CIA recruits its officers from these Ivy League universities, gets them to start student newspapers, commentary newspapers, radio stations, to propagandize against America's adversaries, whether they're communists, leftists, revisionist powers. And the CIA has always been in bed with these Zionists and the Jews, because the Jews, as the free agents of the world, they are the go-between between all the countries. If you want to get a sneak peek behind the Russian curtain, you got to talk to a Jewish person. But at the same time, the Jews have always been self-interested, and they articulated explicitly over and over again that what they care about is the Jewish nation, the Jewish community. And if they're Jewish, their kids are going to be Jewish. Their grandkids are going to be Jewish. And they see the destiny of themselves and their descendants and their people as bound up with Israel. And that's why they want America to be Israel's Air Force. That's why they want America to fight Israel's wars. And they will lie, cheat, and steal to make that happen. And the coup de grace is that when all is said and done, they're also massive hypocrites. While they are telling us about the essential Jewish identity of the state of Israel, Jewish blood and the promised land, they then turn around and tell us, if you're a white racialist, if you talk about Jewish essential identity, you're a bigot.
And that's the biggest point of all of this, is the hypocrisy of it all. And they don't want you talking about it. So people need to wake up, man. We really do, because this is again, repeating myself, the most important issue of our time. It's really been the most important issue since the 40s after World War II. And nobody gets it. Nobody gets it. This kid who's 26 years old, somehow, I don't know how, but he gets it. And if we want to keep living in the world where, I mean, you want to know why your groceries are expensive? Do you want to know why that all of your tax money goes to foreign countries? Do you want to know why Wall Street controls everything? Do you want to know why your life sucks? It's because of this.
You're a genuine white identitarian or white nationalist. You're racist. You're not a real national conservative. If you say there's something up with Judaism or Jewishness, has anything to do with it, you're a crank, a crazy, an anti-Semite. They cancel you and then gaslight you and say you didn't get canceled because the cabal went after you. It's because you're crazy. And you see that if you know the first thing about any of these characters, from Bill Buckley and James Burnham and James Angleton to Irving Kristol and Norm Podhoretz to their next generation, Irving Kristol to Bill Kristol, Norm Podhoretz to John Podhoretz, Peter Thiel and Yoram Hazony, who are all working together to produce J.D. Vance.
And they got all their money too, by the way. You know, the one generation, hey, I'm set. I got my bank account. I got my money. I don't care what happens to anybody else. They don't care about America or any of their fellow Americans. They don't give a shit. As long as they have their money, they've got their families are taken care of. But keep writing that check, middle class. You know, keep busting your ass like a punk. Keep making that money. Keep paying those taxes and give it to all the foreign wars that Israel wants us to fight.
And the next act, just how George Bush from Yale and the CIA succeeded Reagan to take us to war in Iraq, J.D. Vance, Peter Thiel's protege from Yale Law School, will be delivered by Yoram Hazony and Peter Thiel to give us a war in Iran, as he said he would at the Quincy Institute. That's the long story. That's their long march through the institutions. And my next project, if any of this was unclear or rambly or disorganized, is to take all this information and put it in a documentary. And the only reason that I'm telling you this now is because if anything happens to me, this is what you need to do. The project of the free people of America, the project of American sovereignty, of Christian nationalists, of anybody that cares about our independence, as the 1776 movement, as the new American Revolution, is to, just as they started newspapers and campus groups and book clubs and published books and made movies, we need to expose what they are doing in the same way.
Hey, Kazan. Yeah, and by what he just said, this is why, when I look at what Nick Fuentes has done, and I look at Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens and all those people attacking Nick, it doesn't take much to figure out what they're doing. And same thing with Milo Yiannopoulos and all these other, and Charlie Kirk. When they're attacking somebody like Nick Fuentes, obviously they are in that crew of the crystals and everything. I've mentioned that before. And what Nick Fuentes just said here is it is important for a lot of us to break away from the conservative Inc. and break away from the Tucker Carlsons and Candace Owens and educate people as much as we possibly can, because Nick has had a really rough time for quite some time. And to answer your question, Kaz, we're part 3. I don't know if I'm going to do it tomorrow or Thursday. I'll probably do it Thursday. So I'm going to try and stream Tuesday, Thursday, Sunday. I was on Sunday when we did part 1. This is finishing part 2 on this, but what I had mentioned before I think you got here, was Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson were attacking Fuentes in Tucker Carlson's own podcast. But more recently, they were Elon Musk and Milo Yiannopoulos and Candace Owens and I think it's Ryan Dawson were attacking Nick. And the timing is, it's just like these people. It's like, if you were smart, you'd probably wait a little while to not make it so obvious that you're attacking Nick because he's over the target. But they can't help themselves because these are people who are they're just dirtbags. So, what they do, they're paid to attack, they're paid to discredit people like Nick Fuentes, who is telling the truth to the best of his ability. And more, he's gaining momentum like you wouldn't believe. And they did try to kill him. That kid that went to his house during that live stream was absolutely an assassination attempt. There's no question about it, that they were trying to kill him. And so that's who Milo and all these guys are working for, and that's who they get paid by, and that's why they're attacking him. So that is what I want to go over on Thursday and talk about, is get into that, because Nick did another thing last night. I was up till 1:30 or so listening to that. I couldn't finish the whole thing. But we'll be watching that tomorrow and going over that on Thursday, about those attacks, because more people. I mean, he's got a lot of young people behind him. He's got his groypers behind him, but we need a lot more people that are older, 50s, 60s, millennial, not millennials, but Gen X, not X, I don't know, whatever generation is after boomers. We need more of those people, older people, paying attention to what's going on with Nick and what he's talking about. Otherwise, we're not going to get out of this. I mean, we're on a downward spiral that it's getting to the point where we can't pull out of. But things need to change. But people need to be aware of what's going on, and he's exposing it, and he's smart enough to figure it all out.
And the reason I'm telling you all this now is so that you can finish it if I can't, because I won't even let death stop me from bringing attention to what is going on here. It's that important.
So there you go. Part 2. Yeah, and Kaz, this is the thing with Nick, and I was saying earlier on in the stream that people formulate an opinion of someone based on somebody else's judgment. And that is how Nick has been judged. I've had several people that I've seen say, I didn't know anything about Nick. I thought he was this terrible person until I listened to him and I watched his videos. And then when I listened to him talk, I realized that he was nothing of what people were describing. And the Anti-Defamation League is a perfect example. I'm not sure how the Anti-Defamation League is able to exist and hasn't been sued into absolute bankruptcy. SPLC, the same thing. I don't know how I'm not sure how these organizations manage to survive, considering the lies that they tell about many of these people that speak out against what Nick just spoke out against. And again, this has been going on since the Pat Buchanan days, even prior to that, William F. Buckley Jr.'s, right after World War II in the Cold War. And so fast forward to today, Nick is the Pat Buchanan of our day. But we need way more attention put on this guy. And we need more people, older people, to be talking about this stuff too. So anyway, that'll do it. Yeah, I talked about the Boasberg case if you check out there's a video on the Rumble, on my Rumble channel and my YouTube channel. I'm having trouble speaking today, but if you check out those channels, you're obviously in Rumble. There's a video about Boasberg, and yeah, I've talked about. And by the way, there's a lot. going on right now with these prosecutors. And, I'm hoping that after all of this lawfare and everything that's been going on, that these guys can get their just desserts. So Adam Schiff, he's got the mortgage fraud along with the other prosecutor, and Adam Schiff. He's not a prosecutor, but Adam Schiff, the senator, he is in trouble for leaking classified information to try and screw up Trump. He's also in trouble with the mortgage fraud. Letitia James is also going to hopefully get pinched for the mortgage fraud as well. And the mortgage fraud, I can tell you with Adam Schiff, I've said it. I've also covered it in the videos. So check out the videos when you have a chance. Adam Schiff claimed that he had 2 primary residences. I can assure you, in the mortgage world, in the mortgage banking world, you cannot do that. That is simply based on risk to a bank, to where you cannot, under any circumstances, have 2 primary residences. You can tell people that you have 2 primary residences. Well, I live one in Maryland and the other one's in California, and I live in them as my primaries. That's not how the bank looks at it. The bank has to judge which one you're going to walk away from if you run out of money. So it's not your opinion. So he's screwed on that. If they go after him, he is going to get, that he is guilty of that one. Now it's a matter of whether or not they actually prosecute him or not fairly. Letitia James, the other one, is a 5-unit as opposed to a 4-unit, is from what I understand. Once again, it's a hard line. 4-unit is considered residential. 5-unit, after that, it's commercial. So if you lie and say it's a 4-unit and it's really a 5-unit, that's also based on risk. So the more units you have, that's why they say it's considered a residential property at 4. If you go beyond 4 and go into 5, you're in commercial. So she should get screwed on that one. And then Judge Mershon, I think he's going to be investigated. But Boasberg is going to be investigated as well. The worst I think that can happen to him, he could lose his judgeship, and I hope that he does, but he'll probably get a slap on the wrist, but hopefully he gets kicked. He loses his judgeship, and I hope a lot of them do. Fani Willis working with Bill Barr. That was, I don't know if anybody saw that one, Kaz, if you saw that story about Fani Willis working with Bill Barr. There was a story about that. However, I think that was Project Veritas. So there was a woman who has a notebook, and in the notebook, she mentioned how Bill Barr had a list of all these people that they were going after. One of them was Donald Trump. Nick Fuentes was on that list. I think Alex Jones might have been on that list. But there hasn't been anything on that story, so I'm wondering, there's something with the woman with the notebook where there might be a credibility issue there. So they're still working on that. But Fani Willis needs to be investigated, because obviously, I've said this before, all of these cases, if you break it down in the most simplistic way, you just look, and this is what I try to do with everything. And when it comes to the Trump's cases, and if I ever get into an argument with anybody about it, the Trump cases were simply, if you want to argue against him, it's simply timing. If Donald Trump didn't announce that he was going to be president, none of those cases would have come to fruition at all. So it's all you need to know. It's all you need to know. And by the way, going back to the Letitia James one, and also Adam Schiff, people argue, well, if Adam Schiff could do it, then Donald Trump did the same thing. No, he didn't. Donald Trump did not do the same thing. Donald Trump was accused of not valuing his properties properly. And then the court decided that they were going to value his properties based on what they thought that they were worth. And every investment bank or anybody that's in real estate were laughing at Letitia James, and I think it was Mershon on that one. Or no, it wasn't him, but the other judge, basically laughing at them. That was another judge where his daughter, I think, as you mentioned, his daughter was involved with the Democratic Party. They decided they were going to value Trump's properties themselves. So that even if you had an appraiser, that is an interpretation. That is not a hard stop on whether or not it is a primary, secondary investment property or a 4-unit, 5-unit property. So yeah, the Bill Barr and Fannie one is developing, and Adam Schiff, hopefully he gets his. And with this leak classified info and the mortgage thing, and he's got to go down for part 3 Thursday. I'm definitely going to do that. And so yeah. But again, just going over what Nick was talking about today, and then I'll leave it. And by the way, those are still here. Please do me a huge favor. I think we got quite a few people on X. We've got over 120 people on X. Those of you who are watching on Rumble, do me a huge favor. Please subscribe. And if you're on, let's see what we got here. Oh, yeah, on YouTube, subscribe as well. Click the like button on both. Helps out the algorithm, helps me out a lot. But yeah, I mean, this stuff, and I'm concentrating more. Kazan knows I've said this a million times before, but at this point, I kind of have no choice. But this is what I'm passionate about. This is what I like to talk about. This is what I like to get involved in. But also, there's a lot at stake here for a lot of us that I don't think a lot of us realize. That when you look at who the VP is currently and how he's tied into all of this, Nick just laid it out for you. And when you go into the Peter Thiel and you get into all this kind of stuff, having it go back as far as the 40s is crazy. But it also makes sense when you look at it, because you say, okay, well, now the puzzle pieces are put together. And now it kind of makes sense, or it does make sense. And now we really can kind of see behind the curtain and what's going on. And for those of you who know the GameStop thing with Wall Street Bets and the Roaring Kitty guy and all the people that took down those major hedge funds, it kind of has to be the same thing. We cannot rely on one individual politician to save us. We have to come together like the Wall Street Bets guys individually, people buying the stock individually. They were buying GameStop little by little by little, and they all encourage each other to have diamond hands. Don't let go. Hold on at dear, for dear life. Do not sell. Because the more that they bought a GameStop, the more it short squeezed the asshole scumbag hedge funds to where it put them out of business. And they tried to throw the government at them. I think it was, he said scumbag, Waters. She tried to stop these. I mean, the government trying to stop people from buying a stock. Robinhood shut down. Didn't allow these guys to trade. And by the way, going back to, I'm going to talk about this again. Bitcoin is huge. I mean, I'm telling you guys, if you don't look at Bitcoin, and you look at gold too, but and gold is definitely important, and get scan that thing and find out about gold, because gold cannot be controlled by the government. But Bitcoin, people are saying it's digital gold, or call it digital gold. And they're right when they say that. It is digital gold because it's something that cannot be controlled by the government. And the way things are going right now, I am putting everything that I can into Bitcoin, but into self-storage, so it cannot be controlled by anyone else. It can't be controlled by BlackRock, Larry Fink. It can't be controlled by the government. And you're going to start seeing that the popularity of Bitcoin is coming. So, those of you who want more information on Bitcoin, I can send you some free information on that to learn more about it. Here for Gold Co., one of the most popular, well-known companies when it comes to gold. But these are the things that we have to really. I mean, I can't. It's crazy to me that the Wall Street and that the stock market is still going the way it's going. But ultimately, it's going to be the house of cards has to come down. So, all right. So once again, be sure to subscribe. Kazan, good to see you again. If you're still here, I will do part 3 on Thursday. Thank you to producer Bethany for reminding me. I thought that was you, Kazan, but it was Bethany. So yes, part 3 Thursday, but technically it's not really part 3 because I just did part 2. There's just these two related to Tucker Carlson. When it comes to, where he fits into this whole kind of cabal that started in the 40s. But on Thursday, yes, we're going to go in more into what he's talking about with how these other people, these other billionaires, including Elon Musk, are trying to shut him up. And I don't think they're going to shut him up. I think what they're really trying to do is they're trying to destroy his reputation is really what they're trying to do. That's the biggest thing. So, all right, everybody. I'm going to shut it down. I appreciate you being here. Thank you very much. We had a pretty decent turnout, and hopefully it just continues to get bigger and bigger. And we'll see you all on